This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge & Company. Lord of Publishing is the title of a new memoir by legendary literary agent Sterling Lord. He tells wonderful stories of the authors he's known and the books he's loved, as well as recording the golden years of publishing. And he's my guest today. Welcome, Sterling. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, Ronnie.
Now, you've been a literary agent for over 70 years.
Well, it started in 1952. That would be 70 years, yeah.
It's amazing, huh?
Yes, yes.
Did you ever think, well, I don't even know when to say did you ever think, because it seems to me your life is just a continuing, and it flows. One thing flowed into the other.
That's correct.
I mean, you're being born in this beautiful town in the West,
Yes.
Midwest.
Yes.
Where you came, what was the name of the town?
Burlington, Iowa.
Yeah.
The Burlington route, the railroad, was named after
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's right there on the Mississippi.
Right on the Mississippi. The Mississippi's a mile wide there, and the Burlington shops are right there in West Burlington. So it was big time in those before I got there.
And then you were lucky enough to have parents.
Yes.
Who, I mean, everybody has a parent, but you were lucky enough to have parents who loved books.
Yeah, that's true. And I think I was lucky to have the parents I did. I was the oldest of three boys, as you know, and in retrospect, I realized that the parents did so many things for the benefit of we boys, so many things. My father became president of the Southeastern Iowa Area Council of Boy Scouts. Not one of us joined the Scouts.
Oh.
No?
But he was there.
But yeah, he was there, and then he he was president of the Iowa Tennis Association, and I did play. That was my big sport. But the second brother, 4 years younger than I, never played, and the third one walked off the court because my father had a very strong desire to have his son succeed, and he pushed Dick a little bit too hard, and Dick walked off the watch.
But it's unusual, isn't it? If you're 92 years old.
Yeah.
What year were you born?
1920.
1920. In the 20s, for everybody to be such tennis fans, was that unusual then?
Certainly, it was unusual in Iowa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here you are. You're born into a family that they play tennis, which has became a mainstay of your life. I mean,
That's right.
That went through everything. But more than that, your father was a bookbinder. Well,
he was a bookbinder before I was born. He lived in the East, and he went to the Roycroft shops in East Aurora, New York, that Albert Hubbard had established, and he studied bookbinding among other things. And he never told us much about this, but years later, long after he died, I went up there to do some research, and it turns out he was one of their top bookbinders. They sent him to England for a number of years, and he never
never told you.
No, never told us. But it's true that one of the walls in our living room in Burlington, Iowa, was where it was covered by a bookcase that had only those leather-bound, gold inlaid books that he bought.
And did you read them?
Some I did, and some I didn't. I mean, I read books all the time, but those were sort of museum pieces almost.
Yeah. But this was a nurturing family with all of these activities
Yeah.
that really were the basis for what you went on to do.
That's right. I think I read it. So I think I said in the book about how we sat around and read books after dinner. My two brothers and I would help Mother clear the table, and then she'd do the dishes, and we'd wipe the dishes, and then we'd all go into the living room, and we said, I can still see it. We have a fireplace, and Mother would sit on one side of the fireplace, And my father, most of the time, would just lie on the floor. He occasionally went to sleep. But the three of us boys were sprinkled around. And then that's the way we got to, we heard the books. My mother read them to me.
The other version of Little Women or something, that big, lovely scene in this lovely house. So you're very lucky. But you wanted to be a writer, didn't you, at the beginning? You went to college.
Well,
in high school you were writing.
Yeah, I was writing. I mean, did I want to be a writer all the time? Yes and no. I mean, I never thought of that as a full-time profession, but I was writing all the time, and I was editor-in-chief of the high school paper, and I was also a sports stringer for the Des Moines Register and Tribune. They had the famous Peach Sports section, and so that's how I got started early, and got to like it very much.
And then you didn't emphasize this, but in the book, it seems to me the United States military was partially responsible for the next for furthering you along in your career.
By sending me to Europe?
Yeah.
Well, that's
And then
true.
you did the Stars and Stripes afterwards, right?
Well, that's right. The Army, because I was an English major, the Army trained me in electronics, and I became a crew chief on a ground controlled approach unit, which was part of the Army Airways communications system, and we landed planes in ceiling zero weather. Well, the war was over before the Army was over with me. So, and staying in the Army, I managed to transfer to the Stars and Stripes, which is more to my liking. And I finished out my Army term as a staff sergeant with the Stars and Stripes, and then as a civilian, I stayed on with the Stars and Stripes because it was something that I knew and was interested in.
So what brought you back to New York?
Okay.
Did you got married then?
No, reality brought me
Reality
back.
brought it.
Well, okay, we had published this magazine first in Darmstadt by Funkstadt, and then there was this currency reform, and all of a sudden Germany became the most expensive place in Europe to publish, and we looked all over Europe, and guess what? Paris was the least expensive place. So we moved to Paris. Again, we did all of this without losing 1 week. You see, it's a weekly. And
you had a partner also from the Army.
We had a partner?
Yeah. You had a partner. When you say we.
Yeah. I was
Yeah.
I was a partner of a man named Richard Evan Jones. He was a civilian, and they brought him back to work with me. And his wife is still in, he's deceased, but his wife is still in publishing at CUNY.
Boy,
yeah.
isn't that great?
So we got to Paris, and we knew we were geniuses editorially, but we didn't know a damn thing about business. And the next thing you know, we were out of money. And so by that time, I had met enough people in Paris so that I had access to the tennis world in Paris. And I had played tennis since I was 5 years old. It was important for me, as I didn't mention this, but my mother and father, when I was growing up,
they
were trophies in the attic that they'd earned in the.
Yeah, they were really great tennis players.
Well, they were a lot of tennis tournaments scattered through the cornfields of Iowa and Illinois, and that's where they were.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was in Paris, and I played in the French National Indoor Championships. That was a big political thing, getting me in there, and I almost beat the French national champion. I carried him to 6-4 in the 5th set in the tournament, and so that attracted the attention of the powerful people in French tennis. It was all political then, and as a result of that, I got an invitation to go to the first major outdoor tournament of the year, which was at the casino run by the casino at Monte Carlo. Go down to Marlow. So the casino invited me down. They agreed to pay half my expenses, and the tennis association had meanwhile urged me to join a small club on the outskirts of Paris. So that club paid the other half. So I had half my expenses this way, half this way, and I also had a free ride down because the man and woman who got me into the French indoor championships, she was the women's champion of Paris, Jacqueline Bouton. And so they were giving me a free ride down. You know, I never went because I was 28 years old. I knew that I couldn't stand up to the top players in America and Australia when they started coming over to Europe the following year, and I thought it was time for me to be serious about life.
So you met some wealthy people, though. You got some money
Uh,
or a job.
some money. What do you mean?
Well, you said you ran into all this financial trouble with your publication.
Oh yeah, we just folded.
Yeah. Oh, you folded.
We folded.
And then what did you do?
And then I hung around playing tennis for a little while, but decided when this when this thing came up with Monte Carlo,
Yeah.
that it was time for me to be serious about
and
life.
get out of it.
So I got out and took the woman I had married, and took her home, took her to New York, and started my career there.
So you've been very well known in the publishing field and with the authors of publishing a wide range of authors.
Yes.
But of being a very astute businessman in negotiating contracts and all kinds of book deals, right? What I liked in the book was that you said you particularly liked that you represented writers who affected the world in a general way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's their 4 or 5 or 6 books, maybe more, that I could think of that are really quite rewarding. I mean, one of them was Jack Kerouac's On the Road, and it's had an imprint, made an effect on many, many people. I mean, it's still being taught in high schools and colleges, and a friend of mine, Ed Adler, who taught it at NYU for a long time, would tell the kids, you know, this may change your life. And he said it did. It did.
So he walked into your office one day, huh?
Jack?
Yeah, as a young writer?
Well, it was a little bit different than that.
Oh, all right.
Not much, but a little bit. I had been in business just a very short time, and I got a call from Bob Giroux. Bob Giroux was a legendary literary editor.
More than you. Oh, he was an editor.
Editor.
Sorry.
He was an editor at Farrar Straus. All the top literary names. I mean, so he had heard that I was representing a book by a man named Ralph Martin that he was interested in. I don't even remember what book it was, and I don't know whether it exists or not, but what he was trying to do is get to know the young guy on the block, you know. And so 2 weeks later, I must have impressed him, but 2 weeks later he called me up, and he had Jack Kerouac in his office. Or no, Jack had just left, and he said, "Sterling, you're going to hear from Jack Kerouac." And I'd known the name, but I didn't know much about Jack. And he said Jack needed an agent, and he said he's got a scroll, he's got a manuscript, but it's in a long scroll, hundreds of feet long, and he said, that'll be your problem, Sterling. Well, when Kerouac came in, I describe it in the book, a few weeks later, he had already retyped the manuscript, so it was on a traditional 8.5 by 11 paper. And he just was very polite and very, what shall I say, respectful, and we just chatted for a minute or two, and he left with me this manuscript that was a result of maybe only 2 or 3 months of typing, but his whole life experience. And I started working on it immediately. I didn't start selling it immediately. I had to read it first. It was the first novel that was ever submitted to me.
Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you really liked it?
Well, what I thought was, I recognized this was a new voice, and an important voice, and I didn't know anything about I couldn't guess the financial potential, but I just thought it was a voice that should be heard. And so I worked for about 4.5 years to try to find a publisher.
Is that right? That long?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And now the estate. Are you the executor, or what are you? There's
Yeah,
millions of dollars
yeah.
that came as a result of that book and his other books.
I'll just say one little thing.
What?
While Jack was alive, one day he walked into my office unannounced. I mean, it's always unannounced. And he gave me a piece of paper on which he had written that I was to be in charge of his estate.
That's what I meant, yeah.
I have to tell you that what shall I say, the relatives ignored that totally.
That's a very subtle way of saying it, right?
Yeah.
Then you had Ken Kesey, the next generation.
Yes, well, there's a 12-year difference there between Kerouac and Kesey. And I liked and admired them both, and I got along well with them. You know, the key to this business is mutual respect. If I can respect the man and he can respect me, man or the woman, then we have a chance of really getting along well. And the way I got Kesey was I had a call from Tom Ginsberg, who was the acting head of Viking Press and the chief owner, and he says, Sterling, we've got a manuscript here from Ken Kesey, and it's called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I'd like to, would your client Jack Kerouac be willing to write a blurb about this? And I said, well, send it over and let me see. So he sent it over, and of course I read it. And I sent it on to Jack, but I called Tom. I said, Tom, this is a man I like a lot. I want to represent him. Would that be okay with you, or does he have any representation? And Tom, I'd already did quite a bit of business with Tom, and he knew that I was a good agent, and that as hard as I worked, I was also fair. So he just called Ken and said, hey, you've got Sterling Lord.
That's great.
Yeah.
So then we went on. We had, you've mentioned Erica Jong.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With Fear of Fly.
Yes.
And Judge Sirica with the Watergate.
Yeah, Judge was a great guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I just enjoyed him enormously, and I got him a contract that has never been equaled before or since in publishing.
Then you represented David Wise.
That's right.
Who I've always had a special. I went to high school with David Wise and college,
Really?
but I was a little younger than he. Right. Anyway, he's one of the first people with his.
I'm glad you said you were a little younger.
Not much, but a little.
Yeah.
He was one of those people who he had a partner, and they were one of the first who went inside the CIA and really told us what was going on.
See, that's another one of those books that have made an impact on our culture.
Yeah.
Nobody knew much about the CIA. No, the general public didn't, and even the journalists in Washington didn't. And these guys opened it up. David Wise and Tom Ross, The Invisible Government, it was called. And they got onto the CIA. David got onto it particularly because they did the first book on Francis Gary Powers, the U2 affair.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that was, I've got some wonderful stories in the book about that.
More here.
Yeah. And then they went on The Invisible Government, and that was an educator for me, because the CIA tried in every way possible to stop that book, and we all held the line. They couldn't change a word. They couldn't change a word. They even got David and Tom, David Ross and Tom.
David Wise
and
Ross.
Tom Ross even went to the headquarters of the CIA at the request of the head of the CIA, and they tried to. They were talking about the subject was the people whose identity had been revealed in the book.
Oh.
And so the boys said there's no, they denied the whole thing. And then one of the McCone, I think it was McCone, one of his assistants gave him the piece of paper. Here's the list, take it out and look at it overnight. Tom Ross said, hey, wait a minute, you're asking us to take a thing marked top secret out of the place? And they handed it back, and the guy erased the top secret.
He cut it off or something,
Yeah.
right?
They never made a dent. Those guys were tough
Yeah.
and
And
fortunate.
principled.
Yeah, and the first thing that happened that was good, when McCone called the first time to speak to Bennett Cerf, fortunately Bennett was out of town.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the call was given to Bob Loomis, the editor. Bob, there's nobody in the publishing at that time more experienced in dealing with things like this than Bob Loomis.
You were there at the very beginning. I mean, you were with writers when they were making most of their money out of magazines.
That's right.
Then we go to book publishing.
Yeah.
And all the publishers and a lot of family-owned publishing companies, right? And fine publishing companies.
Fine.
Fine, F-I-N-E. I mean,
Yes,
people who were really concerned with the books and the authors.
In those days, that's right. You didn't hear publishers talk about profit and loss or anything like
the bottom line.
Bottom line. They talked about the quality of the works they were publishing. That's what they talked about, and also the quality of the writers.
And now what do we have?
Now it's quite different. It's a money game. A totally different kind of person is coming in as an agent, and we have people. I think there are a number of agents around who don't really read, quite honestly, it's not it's not the same thoughtful literary business that it used to be.
It's a predictable, trying to predict what the sales is. I mean, it's like the politicians. They go out and do a poll where they think what the audience wants, right?
Well, that's true. And see, so many books that are just memoirs, so-called, of people that are illustrious and well-known and stars and so forth, most of whom don't know how to write. They hire a writer and so forth. So that's merchandising. That's not publishing, really. I mean, I'm not being too tough here, but that's
and they're
the
not.
way it is.
They're no longer owned by people who are wanting publishers.
No, in the 50s when I started, most publishing houses were run by the people who owned them and who ran them, who were the head of them. I mean, that was not only true of the small ones, but true of Simon & Schuster and so forth. And now they're mostly run by people with business training that know more about business than they do about books.
And they're parts of conglomerates, aren't they? I mean,
no question. What's happened is over the years that there have been, what should I say, merging of various publishers, and so you have fewer markets for the writer, and what shall I say, the goals are all different. It's dollars and cents.
So your book was published
to an electronic publisher,
right,
because I thought they were the best publisher in the business for my book at that time.
Right.
And I had sold them 125 books, so I had a pretty good idea of how they worked. And I've not regretted it. I mean, they do things that no other publishers have done, for me at least. And I think they do it for all the books.
But now you have an actual book. They also put this out.
Yes, they did the whole smear.
So the first thing, it starts on the internet. I mean, you go on the internet, you go to Open Road.
Yeah. Well, you go to when you want to buy the book, you go to Amazon or you go to Barnes & Noble.
Right.
And for example, I actually had to buy some of my own books, and I just went to Amazon. And I went early, so I placed the order early. They got a discount, but I didn't get the books for a while. You know.
I see.
So, but that's most people are buying books in this form as opposed to the big, sprawling.
Right, and you don't think that that hardcover books are going to be extinct?
Not at all. See, there's a big difference there. There is a big difference, but there are a lot of things about the hardcover book. For example, a simple little thing. You see a person walking down the street carry a hardcover book. It says something about that person. There's no electronic equivalent, you know.
Yeah.
And also, there's a tactile thing, and there's a thing about looking better in the library at home, that sort of thing. And there's a subtle thing of that. It's more elegant as a property. And you know, I grew up with all those yellow leather-bound books with gold inlay.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
and so you know it's a precious thing to be treasured.
Right.
What I loved about your story is your use of intuition and your very careful consideration of the strategies you're going to develop and how to develop something. I mean, you just give this calmness, but this well thought out path that you're going to take.
Yeah.
And that just came from that family back on the shores of the Mississippi.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because that's who I am.
Yeah.
That's who I am.
You tell about a taxi driver who asked you.
Oh yeah. Well, you read to the end of the book. Then.
I read to the end of the book.
Yeah.
Who asked you what? How to live in New York?
Yeah, it was one noon. I was going out and I got the corner of Bleecker and Lafayette, and picked up this cab. And a guy came along, and he was obviously from some Mediterranean country, and seemed, I would think he was about high 30s, maybe 40. And he was quite, I could see, well educated. He spoke well. He had a good mind and interesting questions. So we talked about a few things. And then as we were getting up toward 42nd, I was going to lunch someplace. He said, "Could I ask you a question?" Well, I couldn't say no, because he demonstrated. He said, "Look, I'm pretty new here. How do you get rich in New York?" Now, you might kind of laugh at that, but I didn't. I thought for a minute, and I said, "What you do is you find an occupation that really intrigues you, that you really love, and you get involved in that and stay there the rest of your life, and you live forever. Which was, I was sort of telling him my own story.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're still working.
Yeah.
You go every day.
Yeah, every day.
And what's the name of your agency?
The name of the agency?
Yeah, it's a fancy
Sterling,
name.
no, Sterling Lord Literaristic, because
I love the literaristic.
I merged a smaller company into mine a couple of years
Right.
ago. Yeah.
And you've got a website, and you're there.
Yeah.
And you're very pleased with what you've done and made the contributions to the world.
Well, you know, a lot has happened since I wrote the book, because it forced me to think about things I hadn't even thought about. I think I never realized how effective I was, how important I was, how successful I was, until I started writing the book. And then I had to evaluate things, and I thought about things like, why am I at this age? Why do I have all this energy and all this, you know, whatever? And came up with some of the answers that are in the book. I feel, you know, I don't sit around praising myself. That's not me. But I think I'm pretty pleased with what's happened in my life.
Well, so am I, and I hope people will read this book because they will love it. And
well, thank you.
Sterling, we have come to the end of our program. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me. I appreciate it.
Is there any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore? Please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.